You didn't lose me tonight, Grant. You decided I was never worth keeping. Tessa Monroe stood at the edge of the dining room, rainwater darkening the shoulders of her coat, her eyes fixed on the divorce papers waiting beneath the chandelier. Grant had placed them beside her wedding ring like items from a life he was already done with. 2 wine glasses sat near the bottle. One had been used. The other carried a pale pink mark along the rim. Tessa didn't wear lipstick that color. For 12 years, this table had held birthday cakes, late dinners, unpaid bills, and conversations about the future. Tonight, it held the end of their marriage. Grant rose from his chair and buttoned his suit jacket, as if he were closing a meeting instead of breaking a promise. I didn't want you to find out this way. Tessa looked at the second glass. Which part? The divorce or the fact that she was sitting in my chair? His jaw tightened. Brooke stopped by to discuss work. Of course she did. Tessa set her purse down slowly. Her hands were steady, but her chest felt hollow. Does she discuss work with every married executive over a bottle of wine? Or am I supposed to feel special? This is exactly why we can't talk anymore. Grant exhaled and glanced toward the window. Outside, the streetlights blurred through the rain. Everything becomes an accusation. You left divorce papers on the table beside another woman's glass. Her voice didn't rise. That made him look at her. I'm not accusing you, Grant. I'm reading the room. For a second, something like shame crossed his face. Then it disappeared behind the confidence he wore at board meetings. We've been living separate lives for years. You're comfortable here. You like your small consulting projects, your neighborhood meetings, your quiet routines. I'm moving forward, Tessa. I can't keep apologizing for wanting more. The words landed harder than she expected. Not because they were new, but because he had finally stopped disguising them. He didn't see the woman who had sat beside him when he was unemployed. He didn't remember the nights she reviewed his presentations until 2 in the morning, or the calls she made so opportunities would somehow reach him. He saw a woman standing still while he climbed. Tessa stepped closer and turned the papers toward herself. You think I've been holding you back? Grant hesitated. I think we've outgrown each other. She read the first page. Then the second. He had requested the house, the car, and the investments he believed they had built together. He had signed every page, even the last one. Did Brooke help you choose the lawyer? She asked. Leave her out of this. That was the answer. Tessa picked up the pen. Grant's expression shifted, almost disappointed that she wasn't crying or begging him to reconsider. You should have someone review it. I already understand it. Better than he could imagine. She signed her name beneath his, closed the folder, and pushed it across the table. There. Now you can have the life you think I kept from you. Grant stared at the signature. That's it. Tessa slipped off her coat. No, that was your part. After he left, she waited until his car disappeared into the rain. Then she took out her phone and called the one person who knew everything Grant did not. Malcolm answered on the second ring. Tessa. She looked at the empty chair across from her. Remove every protection attached to Grant Whitmore's position. Malcolm went silent. Are you certain? Tessa touched the bare place where her ring had been. He wants to know what he built without me. Her voice cracked, but only once. Starting tomorrow, let him find out. 12 years earlier, Grant Whitmore had been sitting alone in a nearly empty diner on the south side of Chicago, staring at a termination letter beside a cup of coffee he could no longer afford to refill. Tessa Monroe noticed him because he had been wearing the same navy suit for 3 days, and because every morning he ordered the cheapest thing on the menu while pretending to read the business section. You know that paper is upside down, she said as she passed his booth. Grant looked at the newspaper, then at her. I was testing you. You failed. She slid into the seat across from him, still carrying a legal folder from the neighborhood business center where she worked. Tessa was 26 then, sharp, private, and already better at reading people than most attorneys twice her age. Grant had come to the center looking for help with a construction company that owed him 4 months of pay. He had lost his job when the company collapsed, but he was still trying to protect the crews who had worked under him. That mattered to her. Most people would walk away, Tessa said. Those guys have families. Grant rubbed a hand across his tired face. Walking away does not get them paid. She helped him file wage claims, organize records, and negotiate with the bankruptcy trustee. He stayed late to carry boxes and brought her dinner when she forgot to eat. Their first date happened by accident after a meeting ran past 9. They split a plate of fries at that same diner and argued about whether ambition made people selfish. Ambition does not, Tessa said. Fear does. Grant smiled. You always talk like you already know how the story ends. She did not. Not with him. Grant made her feel seen in ways money never had. When a client questioned whether a young black woman could handle a complex commercial case, Grant did not laugh it off or wait for Tessa to defend herself. He stood, gathered the files, and said, "She is the smartest person in this room. If you cannot respect that, find another team." Tessa remembered that moment for years. It was the reason she believed his character could survive success. When Malcolm Pierce suffered a heart attack the following winter, Grant stayed at the hospital all night. He bought bad vending machine coffee, called Tessa's office, and sat beside her without trying to fix her fear. "You do not have to be strong every minute," he told her. She almost told him everything then. About Monroe Equity Trust. About the fortune her grandmother had built. About the controlling interest Tessa would inherit on her 30th birthday. Instead, she said only that her family had investments. She wanted one part of her life untouched by balance sheets and board votes. Grant proposed a year later with a modest ring he had saved for month by month. "I cannot promise you a perfect life," he said, "but I can promise I will never make you carry it alone." She believed him. After they married, Grant found work managing small infrastructure projects, but 3 years later his employer downsized and eliminated his division. He came home carrying a cardboard box, ashamed to meet her eyes. "I am 33 years old, Tessa. I am supposed to be building something." She held his face between her hands. "Losing a job does not erase who you are." That night, after Grant fell asleep, Tessa called Malcolm. Northstar Meridian Group had an opening for a regional operations director. Grant was qualified, but his application had never made it past the screening software. "Arrange an interview," she said. Malcolm paused. "Does he know Northstar belongs to the trust?" "No, and you want to keep it that way?" Tessa looked toward the bedroom, where Grant was sleeping with one hand resting on her side of the bed. "I want him to know he earned the opportunity." 2 weeks later, Grant walked into their kitchen holding an offer letter, his face bright with hope. He lifted Tessa off the floor and laughed like the future had finally chosen him. She laughed with him. She did not tell him who had opened the door, and neither of them understood that the secret meant to protect their marriage had just begun to change it. Grant did not change all at once. That would have been easier for Tessa to understand. At first, he was still the man who brought home takeout after late meetings and left coffee beside her laptop before sunrise. He worked hard at Northstar Meridian, harder than most people around him, and within 2 years he was running some of the company's largest infrastructure projects. Tessa was proud of him. She also knew how close he had come to losing everything more than once. When a transportation contract ran over budget, 3 executives pushed to remove him. Tessa reviewed the project through Monroe Equity Trust and found that Grant had inherited bad numbers from the previous director. She voted to give him 6 more months. He turned the project around and received a promotion. He came home that night carrying champagne. "They finally see what I can do," he said. Tessa smiled and lifted her glass. "You gave them a reason to." She did not tell him that one vote had saved his job. A year later, a market downturn threatened his entire division. Tessa approved emergency funding through the trust, but she made sure her name stayed off every document Grant would see. She told herself she was protecting his confidence. In truth, she was becoming afraid of what would happen if he learned how much of his rise had passed through her hands. Success changed the way Grant entered a room. It changed his suits, his friends, and eventually, the way he spoke to his wife. At a company dinner, he looked at Tessa's navy dress and asked, "Do you have anything a little more executive?" She stared at him. "I am an attorney, Grant. I know how to dress for dinner." "That is not what I meant." "Then say what you meant." He kissed her forehead and told her not to make it a fight. That became his favorite phrase whenever she refused to shrink quietly. Brooke Halstead joined Northstar as Director of Corporate Strategy the following spring. She was polished, calm, and always seemed to know exactly what Grant wanted to hear. During meetings, she praised his instincts before anyone else could question them. At dinners, she laughed at stories Tessa had heard 100 times. Brooke never insulted Tessa directly. She was too careful for that. Instead, she used concern. "It must be difficult," Brooke said at a charity reception, "being married to someone whose career keeps growing so quickly." Tessa met her eyes. "Not when you are secure in your own life." Brooke smiled. "Of course." Later that night, Grant complained that Tessa had been cold. "She was trying to include you." She was measuring me. Grant loosened his tie and sighed. You always assume the worst when someone comes from my world. Tessa almost corrected him. It was not his world. But she stayed quiet. Over the next 6 months, Grant began spending more evenings with Brooke, preparing what he called a transformational acquisition. He stopped asking Tessa's opinion. When she offered one, he said the deal was too complicated to explain. Then a confidential audit reached Tessa's office. The target company had overstated its contracts, hidden debt through related businesses, and paid consulting fees to a firm owned by Brooke's brother. Tessa read the report twice. Grant's signature was not on the acquisition papers yet, but his name appeared throughout the internal approval notes. Malcolm stood across from her desk. If he signs, the losses could reach $200 million. Tessa closed the file. Does Brooke know we found this? Not yet. Her phone lit up with a message from Grant. Do not wait up. Brooke and I are finishing the deal tonight. Tessa grabbed her coat. For years, she had protected him without asking whether he still deserved it. This time, she would give him the truth. What he did with it would decide more than his career. Tessa reached Northstar Meridian's downtown office just after 9 that night. Most of the building was dark, but the executive floor still glowed above the Chicago River. Grant and Brooke were inside the main conference room with 2 outside advisors, a stack of documents spread across the table. Grant looked up when Tessa entered. His surprise turned quickly into irritation. What are you doing here? Tessa closed the door behind her. Trying to stop you from making a very expensive mistake. Brooke leaned back in her chair, composed as ever. This is a confidential meeting. Then you should be more careful about who you trust with confidential information. Grant stood. Tessa, this is not the time. She placed a folder in front of him. The company you are buying overstated its active contracts by nearly 40%. It also moved debt into 3 related businesses that do not appear in the presentation you were given. One of the advisors reached for the folder, but Brooke covered it with her hand. Where did you get this? That is not the question you should be asking. Grant's face tightened. You went through my work files? No. I reviewed public filings, lien records, and documents available to counsel for a major shareholder. It was close enough to the truth without revealing everything. Brooke gave a small laugh. You are a neighborhood business attorney, Tessa. You do not represent any major shareholder here. Tessa looked directly at Grant. Ask for an independent forensic review before you sign anything. Grant did not touch the folder. You came into my office in the middle of a deal you do not understand and accused my strategy director of fraud. I said the numbers do not hold up. You always do this. His voice stayed low, but the anger underneath it was clear. The moment something matters to me, you find a reason to doubt it. Tessa stared at him. I am trying to protect you. From what? Success. The room went silent. Brooke lowered her eyes, but Tessa saw the satisfaction in her face. Grant stepped closer to his wife. You cannot advise me on a world you have never stepped into. For 1 second, Tessa nearly told him everything. She almost said that the building, the company, and the chair he was standing beside all existed under a trust she controlled. She almost showed him the voting records carrying her approval. Instead, she asked, Do you really believe that? Grant glanced at Brooke before answering. I believe you stopped understanding my life a long time ago. That was enough. Tessa picked up the folder. Then sign whatever you want. She walked out without looking back. In the elevator, her hands began to tremble. Not because he had embarrassed her. Because she finally understood that every time she saved him, she gave him another reason to believe he had never needed her. Malcolm was waiting in the lobby. Did he listen? Tessa shook her head. Call the investment committee. Freeze the acquisition pending review. That will protect him again. It will protect Northstar. Malcolm studied her face. And Grant. The elevator doors opened behind them. Tessa looked back toward the executive floor. This is the last time. 2 weeks later, the committee blocked the transaction. Grant came home furious, convinced unseen executives were trying to sabotage him. Brooke told him the board feared he was getting too powerful. By then, she had already formed a new holding company and moved the acquisition under a different name. She told Grant they could complete the deal privately, leave Northstar, and build something of their own. He believed her. 3 days before placing the divorce papers on Tessa's table, Grant signed a personal commitment letter supporting Brooke's revised transaction. He did not tell legal counsel. He did not tell the board. He did not read the final disclosure schedule. And the morning after Tessa signed the divorce agreement, Malcolm entered her office carrying a copy of Grant's signature. He went around the committee, he said. Tessa read the page, then set it down. Grant had not simply ignored her warning. He had tied his name, his position, and possibly his future to Brooke's deception. For the first time, Tessa did nothing to stop the fall. For the first few weeks after moving out, Grant believed he had finally taken control of his life. Brooke found him a furnished apartment in a glass tower near the river, close enough to North Star Meridian that he could walk to work in 10 minutes. The company covered the lease under his executive relocation package. A black sedan picked him up for client meetings. His name appeared on a short list of candidates expected to become the next chief executive officer. At industry dinners, Brooke introduced him as the man who was about to change the company. Grant told himself the divorce had been painful but necessary. Then he stopped using the word painful. "You look lighter," Brooke said one evening as they stood on the apartment balcony. The city spread beneath them. "I feel focused. That is because no one is making you feel guilty for wanting more." Grant did not ask who she meant. He already knew. Across town, Tessa packed only what belonged to her personally. She left the television, the furniture Grant had chosen, and the framed photographs he had not bothered to remove. Malcolm watched a moving crew carry out her grandmother's desk. "You could challenge his request for the house," he said. "The trust owns the property through Monroe Residential Holdings. He cannot receive title to it in the divorce." "I know. Then why let him believe he can?" Tessa closed the last box. "Because I am done explaining reality to a man who only respects it after it costs him something." She moved into a quiet condominium she had owned for years under the trust. The next morning, she signed the documents that would end her private role and place her publicly before North Star's board as the controlling shareholders' representative. Grant knew none of this. He was too busy preparing the acquisition Brooke promised would make him independent from the company. The trouble began with a phone call from the bank. The private credit line he expected to finance the deal had been denied. Grant called his banker immediately. "There must be a mistake. The previous support agreement is no longer active," the banker explained. "Without that guarantee, the loan does not meet our risk requirements." "What support agreement?" The banker paused. "You should speak with your counsel." Grant called Brooke. She blamed North Star's board. 2 days later, the sedan service ended because his position was under formal review. The apartment manager informed him that the corporate housing benefit had been suspended and that he would need to sign a personal lease at $14,000 a month or move out within 30 days. Grant marched into his office demanding answers. His assistant would not meet his eyes. "Legal placed a hold on all discretionary benefits," she said. "Why?" "I was told there is an internal investigation." Brooke arrived minutes later, carrying a folder and wearing the calm expression that usually settled him. "This is retaliation," she said. "Someone on the board knows we are leaving." Grant lowered his voice. Could Tessa be behind this? Brooke did not hesitate. Who else would have a reason? He wanted to believe her because the alternative was worse. The alternative was that his own choices had caused the ground beneath him to shift. That afternoon, internal audit requested his emails, expense records, and communications with the acquisition target. Grant refused to surrender his laptop until corporate counsel reminded him that company systems and records were North Star property. By Friday, his access to several financial platforms had been restricted. Brooke stopped answering certain questions. When he asked why her brother's consulting firm appeared in the payment records, she told him he was becoming paranoid. "We are supposed to be partners," Grant said. "Then act like one," she replied. The following Monday, a formal notice arrived by secure courier. Grant was required to attend an emergency meeting of the board's Audit and Risk Committee. He read the first page twice. The meeting would address unauthorized commitments, undisclosed conflicts of interest, and possible breaches of fiduciary duty. Then he reached the final line. Presiding representative of the controlling shareholder, Tessa Monroe. Grant stared at her name until the letters blurred. The wife he had dismissed as a woman with small ambitions was about to sit at the head of the table where his entire future would be decided. Grant arrived at North Star Meridian 30 minutes early, hoping the notice was some kind of legal formality. It was not. The conference room doors were already open, and every seat along the polished table was occupied by board members, outside counsel, internal audit, and 2 representatives from the company's insurers. Brooke sat near the far end with her own attorney. She did not look at him. Then Tessa entered. She wore a charcoal suit, her hair pulled back, a slim binder under one arm. No dramatic entrance. No smile. She simply took the chair at the head of the table, the same chair Grant had imagined sitting in for years. Malcolm Pierce stood beside her. "This meeting is being conducted under the authority of Monroe Equity Trust," he said. "The trust holds 61% of Northstar Meridian Group's voting shares. MS. Monroe is its controlling beneficiary and authorized representative." Grant felt the room tilt. "That is not possible." Tessa opened her binder. "It is documented in the corporate records. You told me your family had investments." "They do." Her voice was steady. "This is one of them." Grant looked around the table, waiting for someone to challenge her. No one did. Malcolm placed several documents in front of him. The first showed Tessa's vote approving emergency funding for Grant's division during the downturn. The second was a committee resolution giving him 6 months to correct the failed transportation project. The third was a memorandum recommending him for the interview that had brought him into Northstar 12 years earlier. Each document carried a trust authorization tied to Tessa. "You were behind all of this?" Grant asked. "I opened doors," she said. "You still had to walk through them." That should have sounded generous. Instead, it made every promotion he had celebrated feel suddenly incomplete. Corporate counsel moved to the acquisition file. The evidence was worse than Grant expected. Payment records showed consulting fees routed to a firm owned by Brooke's brother. Internal emails showed Brooke had received updated debt schedules before Grant signed the commitment letter. She had not shared them with him. "I relied on her analysis," Grant said. "You signed a personal commitment supporting the transaction after the investment committee rejected it," counsel replied. "You also failed to disclose your relationship with Ms. Halstead and her family connection to a paid consultant." Grant turned toward Brooke. "You told me the consulting firm was independent." Her attorney touched her arm, warning her not to answer. Tessa watched him quietly. There was no satisfaction in her face. That made it worse. "Did you know?" Grant asked her. "I knew the transaction was compromised," Tessa said. "I warned you before you signed. You could have told me who you were. Would that have made the numbers more believable?" He had no answer. The board voted to place Grant on administrative leave with pay while the investigation continued. His access to company systems would remain suspended. Brooke was placed on unpaid leave pending review of possible fraud, conflicts of interest, and misuse of corporate funds. As the meeting ended, Grant stayed in his chair. "Are you taking everything from me?" Tessa closed the binder. "The house belongs to the trust. The car and apartment are company benefits. Your job is under review because of your decisions." She met his eyes. "I am not taking your life, Grant. I am stopping the work I did to keep your choices from reaching you." Brooke rose quickly and headed for the door, but a security officer stepped into the hallway and asked her to remain for a separate interview with outside counsel. Tessa slid one final document across the table. It was a transfer report showing that money had moved from the acquisition target into Brooke's brother's firm, then into an account controlled by Brooke herself. Grant stared at the figures. Brooke finally looked at him. The warmth she had shown him for months was gone. "Do not say anything," her attorney warned. Grant understood then that he had not been her partner. He had been her signature. By the end of the week, Brooke had stopped pretending Grant mattered to her. Her attorney submitted a written statement claiming Grant had directed the entire acquisition and pressured her to move quickly. Grant read it twice in the small conference room where Northstar's outside counsel had asked him to sit. "She is saying I planned this?" he asked. His attorney, Daniel Cho, folded his hands on the table. "She is saying you had final authority and ignored repeated warnings. That is not what happened. Then we need records that prove it." Grant looked through months of messages. Most of Brooke's instructions had been verbal. Her emails were careful, full of phrases like "at your direction" and "based on your approval." She had built a paper trail around him while making him feel like the most powerful person in the room. When investigators questioned Brooke about the payments to her brother's firm, she blamed Grant again. "He wanted the deal closed before the board could interfere," she said. "I followed his strategy." Grant confronted her outside the interview room. "You told me those fees were standard." Brooke glanced at her attorney, then back at him. "Do not speak to me without counsel present." "Was any of it real?" he asked. For the first time, her expression lost its polish. "I thought you were going somewhere." "That is not an answer. It is the only one you are getting." She stepped closer, keeping her voice low. "I love the man I thought you were becoming." not the man who needed his wife quietly holding up every part of his life. The words stayed with him long after she walked away. North Star terminated Brooke for cause after the internal investigation confirmed undisclosed conflicts, false representations, and misuse of company funds. The matter was referred to federal authorities and the company's civil litigation team. Grant remained on leave. Investigators found no evidence that he received stolen money, but they documented how often he ignored compliance rules, bypassed legal review, and failed to disclose his personal relationship with Brooke. He had not designed the fraud. He had made it easier. His family called as soon as the news began moving through Chicago's business circles. His mother asked whether Tessa could make this disappear. His older brother wanted to know why Grant had hidden the fact that his wife controlled North Star. Grant ended both calls without answering. They were not worried about Tessa. They were worried about what she could do for them. He drove to the house that evening, forgetting for a moment that he no longer had the right to enter. His code failed. The porch light came on automatically, illuminating the brass numbers Tessa had chosen years earlier. A small box sat beside the door with his name on it. Inside were personal files, an old watch, and a thick folder divided by year. The first section contained the recommendation that secured his North Star interview. The next held the vote that saved his division. Page after page showed problems Tessa had quietly corrected before they reached him. At the bottom was a sealed envelope dated 6 years earlier. Grant recognized her handwriting immediately. He opened it at his apartment and found a letter beginning with the words, "Grant, there is something about my family and my work that I should have told you before we married." He read until he reached the final paragraph. Tessa had planned to reveal everything the night he received his first executive promotion. She had even made a reservation at their favorite restaurant. Grant remembered that night. He had come home angry after a board member questioned whether he had earned his position. Over dinner, he had mocked another executive for inheriting her seat through family money. "People like that never know whether they are actually talented," he had said. According to the letter, Tessa had listened, returned the trust documents to her bag, and decided to wait. Grant lowered the pages. He had spent years blaming her silence. Now he knew the moment she had tried to tell him. He was the reason she stopped. Grant waited 4 days before asking Tessa to meet him. She agreed to 20 minutes at a quiet coffee shop near Millennium Park, the kind of place where nobody cared who sat at the corner table. When she arrived, he was already there with her old letter folded beside his untouched coffee. He stood, then seemed unsure whether he had the right to greet her. Tessa removed her coat and sat across from him. "You found the box." "I found everything." His voice sounded smaller than she remembered. "The interview, the funding, the board vote, all the times you stepped in. You still did the work, Grant. That does not change what I believed about myself." Tessa held his gaze. "No, it changes what you refused to see about me." He looked down at the letter. "I blamed you for hiding the truth. Then I remembered that dinner." Tessa said nothing. She did not need to. "You were going to tell me," he continued. "And I sat there talking about people who inherited power like they were frauds. You were angry. I was arrogant." The word landed between them without an excuse attached. Grant told her he was cooperating fully with North Star's investigation. His attorney expected the board to conclude that he had violated internal policies and his fiduciary duties, but had not knowingly participated in Brooke's theft. He would probably lose his position, his deferred compensation, and most of his stock options. Tessa listened without softening. "I am sorry," he said. "For Brooke. For the divorce. For treating your work like it was small, because I did not understand it." His eyes moved toward the window. "For making you feel like you had to hide in your own marriage." For a moment, the man across from her looked like the Grant from the diner, before titles and access became the way he measured himself. Then he added, "I lost everything because I did not know who you were." Tessa's expression changed. Not with anger. With disappointment. "No," she said. "You lost everything because you decided who I was without asking." Grant went still. "That is not what I meant." "Then answer one question." She leaned forward. "If I had no trust, no voting shares, and no power to affect your career, would you be sitting here asking for another chance?" He opened his mouth, but no answer came. Tessa nodded slowly. "That silence is why we are not ready to talk about us. I do love you. I believe you loved me." Her voice remained gentle, which made the boundary firmer. "But you also loved being the most important person in the room. When you thought I was ordinary, you stopped treating me like an equal." Grant looked at the ring mark still faintly visible on her hand. Is there anything I can do? Yes. Stop asking me to erase the consequences before you have lived through them. Tessa stood and put on her coat. She left him with the letter and the coffee he had never touched. 3 months later, Northstar formally terminated Grant for bypassing compliance procedures, concealing a conflict of interest, and exposing the company to financial risk. The board did not refer him for criminal prosecution, but it ordered the repayment of a performance bonus tied to the failed transaction. He sold his luxury watch, moved into a modest apartment in Oak Park, and accepted a lower-level operations job at a family-owned manufacturing company with no connection to Tessa. Nobody opened the door for him there. Nobody cleaned up his mistakes. 6 months after their meeting, Tessa received a plain envelope at her office. Inside was a receipt showing that Grant had repaid every dollar of the disputed bonus. Beneath it was a single handwritten sentence. I finally understand that regret is not repayment. Tessa read it twice. Then Malcolm entered with news that Brooke had agreed to cooperate with investigators and return part of the missing funds. There is one more thing, he said, placing an invitation on her desk. The neighborhood business center where Tessa and Grant first met was reopening after a major renovation. Both of their names appeared on the original donor wall. Grant had been invited. So had she. Tessa stared at the invitation, realizing their next meeting would happen in the exact place where they had once believed love alone would be enough. The neighborhood business center looked different beneath the new glass entrance and fresh brickwork, but the old diner sign from across the street was still visible through the windows. Tessa arrived just before sunset and found the main hall filled with small business owners, legal volunteers, construction crews, and families who had once depended on the center to keep their doors open. Her name appeared on a bronze donor wall near the entrance. So did Grant's. He was standing several feet away in a simple navy jacket, speaking with a young contractor about payroll software. No assistant. No company car waiting outside. When he saw Tessa, he finished the conversation before walking over. You came. So did you. He nodded toward the donor wall. I forgot we made that contribution together. We did a lot of good things together. Tessa let the words sit where they belonged. In the past, but not erased. Grant did not ask for forgiveness. He did not mention the marriage. Instead, he told her his new employer had promoted him to plant operations manager after he helped save 12 jobs during a supply shortage. That is good work, she said. It feels different when I know exactly what part was mine. Before she could answer, the center director called everyone toward a covered display near the stage. Tessa assumed it was another plaque. Then the cloth came down, revealing the new legal clinic wing. Across the glass doors were the words Monroe Community Enterprise Center. Tessa turned toward Malcolm, stunned. What did you do? Malcolm smiled. Not me. The director handed Tessa a letter. Grant had donated the remaining proceeds from the sale of his stock options to fund free legal services for small businesses. He had refused naming rights for himself. Instead, he asked that the clinic carry the Monroe name, honoring Tessa's grandmother and the work Tessa had done long before anyone knew she controlled a billion-dollar trust. The room applauded, but Tessa barely heard it. She looked at Grant. Why? He took a breath. Because your name should have been on the door years ago. That was all. No speech. No attempt to turn the gift into a reason she owed him something. Later, they stood outside beneath the streetlights as families moved past them toward the parking lot. Grant reached into his pocket and held out the old wedding ring Tessa had left on the dining room table. I kept thinking this belonged to the life I lost, he said. It does not. It belongs to the promise I broke. Tessa closed his hand around it. Then keep it until you understand the difference. Grant gave a quiet nod. I think I am starting to. Across the street, the diner's neon sign flickered on. For 1 second, they were 26 again, arguing over cold fries and believing love would protect them from becoming people they did not recognize. But they were not those people anymore. Tessa stepped back. Take care of yourself, Grant. You too, Tessa. She walked toward Malcolm's car without looking over her shoulder. Grant stayed beneath the light, not chasing her, not calling her name. He finally understood that remorse did not earn access to the person he had hurt. It only gave him the responsibility to become better whether she returned or not. The next morning, Tessa entered Northstar's boardroom and took her seat without hiding behind a trust, a lawyer, or anyone else's name. On the wall behind her hung a photograph from the clinic opening. In it, She was laughing with a group of young black women preparing to launch their first companies. Grant was barely visible in the background, carrying folding chairs with the volunteers. That was the final truth neither of them had expected. Tessa's victory was not that the man who dismissed her finally learned her worth. It was that she no longer needed him to confirm it. And Grant's punishment was not losing a powerful wife. It was living long enough to understand that she had been powerful even when he thought she was ordinary.